Energy now is a matter of national security. China is on a mission to grow their energy generation tenfold.
I'm really intensely focused on what this technology means for the future of our energy production. We have resources all around us. How we use them determines our future.
Digital energy for us is the confluence of compute and energy in how you create value by converting energy into a monetary instrument.
Now we're living in a world where there are multiple points of generation feeding in multiple directions. Intermittent sources of energy producing power that really can't be controlled, and utilities everywhere are having to wrestle with how do we balance things out. But it turns out that if you can go one step further and find variable sources of demand on the grid, now the ability to balance is far more agile.
What we're going to see with generation at the edge is this growing symbiotic relationship between data centers, energy generation, and energy storage. Those technologies that balance load inside the data center, but also outside the data center.
The evolution of AI, the evolution of our energy systems go hand in hand, and Mara is sitting smack dab in the middle.
Barbara, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you also so much for joining Mara's board. We're so happy to have you. Love to introduce you to our audience, our shareholders, obviously, and our employees. Tell us a little bit about how you got here.
You know, Fred, first of all, it's a privilege to serve on the Mara board, and getting to know the team is so much fun. And it really is part of the arc of my particular story, because I was going to be a math professor like my parents. But IBM came calling at Wake Forest and said, hey, we'd love to teach you how to be a computer programmer. I thought that would make me a better math professor someday. And I got into the business and just could not stop. I mean, I was just so much fun. And what I enjoyed the most was working on big, gnarly problems. My first assignment was classified. I can't tell you about it, but it helped bring down the Berlin Wall. It helped end the Cold War. And there was a moment when our chief engineer called all the programmers into a conference room. And he said, I wanted to make sure you knew that our technology had been used this weekend. A fighter pilot was shot down behind enemy lines, and our technology was used to first locate him and then to help extract him. And what he said next really set the arc of my career. It was, that fighter pilot was my nephew.
Oh, wow.
And he came home for Thanksgiving thanks to you.
Oh, goodness.
Fred, I mean, that's the moment when I realized that technology changes the world we live in ways that are helping people everywhere. From that to satellite command and control for the global positioning system, to biometrics for the FBI, to border security with customs and border protection. When I look back on it now, what I see is the thing that has driven me throughout is the mission, getting involved in the hardest thing I could find, meeting the brilliant people who are inventing new things. And so when I got the invitation to join Mara, boom, it just made perfect sense.
So today you're with Siemens. You lead Siemens US. What's the big gnarly problem you're working on today?
So I had been working with IBM, and IBM sold its business to Lockheed Martin. And I had been with the organization for 27 years when I had the opportunity to make a change. I got an invitation to go to Booz Allen. A certain person named Summer Anderson was the recruiter who found me on this newfangled thing called LinkedIn. And she said, hey, your skills profile matches up. I was with Booz Allen for a year when a former boss of mine from Lockheed Martin called and said, I've gone to Siemens, and I think you would really love it here. I'd like you to come, and then I'd like you to be my successor as we start this new federally focused business in Siemens. I didn't know who Siemens was, so I went to the library. I checked out the annual report, and I found a business that built its strategy around global megatrends. Climate change, urbanization, the aging demographics of people everywhere, the ever more global supply chain, though today we focus on global. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit. And then digitalization of everything. And you kind of go, oh, electrification, automation, digitalization. We can actually be working on solving global security issues. It was like an expansion from the national security focus that I had enjoyed so much at IBM and Lockheed Martin.
And as you think about the area of national security, so people historically have worried about kinetic threats. Now we're worrying about digital threats and digital threats that affect our infrastructure.
Right.
You know, if the grid were to go down in the US, after 5 days, panic would ensue, most probably. So as you think about the grid and infrastructure today, what do you think are the key areas where companies like Mara, the government, and others should be focused to try and prepare us for this world that's changing, where things have to be more locally centered and where energy really is the key driver of productivity?
Energy is prosperity. And the ability to provide energy where it's needed is a critical superpower. And by the way, the US excelled in this, right? The National Academy of Engineers called the grid the greatest invention of the 20th century. And it's no surprise. I mean, that is a machine that is miraculous. Getting power to where it's needed is key to economic growth. And I love to tell my team, hey, the economy can only grow as fast as the grid. So we at Siemens obviously focus on the kind of switchgear, the low and medium voltage that makes it possible to provide all that. Well, how do you do that? A whole lot of what we're using now is no longer electromechanical, it's digital. Using software to help us control where electricity flows, where we draw demand. And by its very nature, that exposes an attack surface for cyber threats. And I was having a conversation with my team about this of, man, you know, I met one of the big leaders in Siemens globally who was responsible for the transformer business. And what she said is, hey, we're analog, and maybe it's a cool thing. But a year later, she showed me at the Hanover Fair a new transformer that was software defined. What she had realized, and what everybody is coming to realize, is that if you can use technology to help you understand threats, you can actually strengthen the whole network. So coming back then to your question of how important is this to national security? Well, power is critical. And so Mara's capabilities and its place in the fabric of our power infrastructure in the world is key. And along with that is a huge responsibility for cybersecurity and understanding threats of all kinds.
The fabric of the grid is key to national security. In the digital world now, we're talking about digital assets. And one of the key challenges in the world of digital assets is, in the case of Bitcoin, it's not controlled by a government. It's not controlled by a company. There's no issuer. It really has become something governments are fighting over. Because if people hold and operate a lot of Bitcoin mining in their country, it's a question of block space. It's almost as if energy and digital assets have now become tools for nation states to control the world economy, to control prosperity, essentially. So when we go back and think about this issue of energy as prosperity, the most prosperous countries are the ones where energy is the most abundant. And in your mind, how do we make this energy abundance grow in the US in an environment where we have a need to consume more and more energy, AI, and these other aspects?
Yeah, this, I think, is the question of the decade, Fred. So at Siemens, when we think about the energy equation writ large, we are thinking about power generation, but our colleagues at Siemens Energy took all the power generation capabilities and the high voltage transmission and distribution. That's their expertise. Where do we focus? We focus where the energy gets used. So think about the distribution network and medium voltage down to low voltage, and then where that power gets used. And so we're intensely focused on sources of power and then uses of power. Of course, one of the big issues is how do we balance the load on the grid? And you know, in the past, when we've had continuous operations like fossil fuel power generation, et cetera, you could define a base load and everything worked and balanced on the grid as needed, throttle things up and down, no problem. Now we're living in a world where there are multiple points of generation feeding in multiple directions. We've got intermittent sources of energy producing power that really can't be controlled. And utilities everywhere are having to wrestle with how do we balance things out? Well, along came battery storage. Very cool. And by the way, I represent Siemens on the Fluence board of directors. And I'm excited about the idea that we have this storage capability that in essence serves as a virtual power line. When we're making excess power and we have no place to send it, store it. And then when we need that power, draw on it. Fantastic, perfect. But it turns out that if you can go one step further and find variable sources of demand on the grid, now the ability to balance is far more agile. And this is the thing that got me so excited about Mara. I mean, I know there are a lot of people who are very, very focused on the digital currency side of this. I'm really intensely focused on what this technology means for the future of our energy production. And by having a variable load on the grid, man, we can step up production tremendously. And then that gives the utilities a way to monetize their investments. It gives big users like data centers the opportunity to pencil out projects that wouldn't otherwise pencil out. Suddenly, everyone wins in this cycle. This is going to be one of those killer apps, if you will, of the grid.
When you think about battery technology, battery is a way to store energy when you generate it, but you still have to then get that energy to a consumer.
Yeah.
What excites me about what we do with dispatchable load is we bring the demand to where the generation is.
Yes.
So we don't rely on grids, the congestion of grids. We don't have any of those problems. We can take a solar, a wind, an intermittent generator and say, every electron you don't sell, we can consume. And we can turn that into digital gold, Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Same thing for any source of electrification, any source of energy, and even battery technology. A battery gets full.
Yeah.
What do you do with the energy when the battery's full?
There you go.
Right. So I believe there's in the future, a marriage between dispatchable load connected to battery systems.
Yes.
Where you can optimize batteries, because one of the challenges with batteries is charge and discharge cycles.
Right.
We don't have the technology yet today. We'll get there. But today, the technology, batteries wear out effectively, right? And so you need to be very careful about how much you charge them, how much you discharge them, because over time, they need to be replaced.
It's a multivariable optimization problem, which is a perfect application for AI. And so, what we're seeing everywhere is people beginning to adopt technology to help them solve this problem. And yeah, the fact that the Mara technology marries up so well into this equation in the large as well as in the small. So, Fred, I've been saying to a lot of people that I think the most exciting place in the economy right now is the grid edge. I mean, what role are vehicles going to play in our future energy equation? What about homes? My own mom put solar panels on her roof, and the utility pays her most months. So, we're getting to this new equation. I know that the Mara team is looking closely at the idea of the edge, really what technologies are going to be needed there. Are you ready to share anything?
In Finland, we have 2 data centers that heat 80,000 residents in a distributed district heating system, for example. So we believe Bitcoin mining has this place in the energy grid at the edge, where we're able to help essentially do arbitrage on the energy equation for each homeowner. Now take that up a scale. Take that to the microgrid scale. Here we're sitting in Irvine, California today filming this. There are lots of office buildings. Now what happens when you clad a building in solar panels? Now that office building is generating more energy than is needed for the office building. It would have batteries in the basement. It could also have a data center in the basement. That data center could generate all the hot water and heating needed for that building and use any excess energy that's not being stored in the battery. The battery could then also provide energy for the communities around it. And so I believe what we're going to see with generation at the edge is this growing symbiotic relationship between data centers, energy generation, and energy storage. So as we now look at what's happening today, AI is exploding. AI has huge needs for power. What does that mean for the energy fabric? What does it mean on a large scale? What does it mean at the micro scale?
I'll give you my US-based perspective first. The idea that our demand for electricity is going to double, triple, quadruple, quintuple, who knows where this ends. I think the demand for knowledge and therefore power is going to continue to expand. And literally, the bottleneck here is not how fast can the AI innovators go. The bottleneck is going to be how much power can we produce. And so innovators everywhere, whether it's in the data center themselves, looking for lower energy usage, whether it's in the grid itself, managing and balancing load, whether it's other consumers of energy lowering their energy demands so that we can devote more to compute. I think this is the equation to be solved right now.
So as we solve that equation, we're looking to put essentially compute near where the data is consumed.
Yes.
We need to dramatically grow the availability of energy and the availability to transmit the information that's being produced also. So now you have a communications fabric mixed with an energy fabric, and energy now is a matter of national security.
Yeah.
I think when you and I spoke before, you mentioned China is on a mission to grow their energy generation tenfold. Give us a sense of the magnitude of that.
Think about any country that is expanding its own manufacturing operations, expanding its own, access to transportation, et cetera. The things that we do as we develop our economies, that all of those are demanding more and more electrification. Now, come back to the United States, where over the last couple of decades, demand for electricity has remained almost flat. Yes, we've created new demands, but we've also driven energy conservation so well that it's basically been flat. Our large utilities haven't had to put new production online in quite some time. In fact, we've been retiring things. And so we're in a moment where we need every source of energy we can get. And then we need to have the right permitting structure so that we can actually deploy those assets. Fred, you and I have talked about the sheer idea that power production close to data centers, close to use, is going to be key to our future. Where are those big power draws? Can we go global? What's really cool about the technology that's developed is the ability that we don't have to be seeking global sources of production or even national sources of production. We can really go on the global to local level, use global innovation, but implement locally. At Siemens, we've been engaged in building microgrids for quite some time, and the stories are incredible. Everything from a Native American tribe in Northern California who put up one of our microgrids, and during wildfires or during curtailment periods of the local utility, they were able to island themselves. They became actually a power source using their solar panels in order to allow people to come in and plug in and charge up. So we know that this technology works. And so what I'm anticipating is what will evolve now is very much a highly integrated quilt almost of small power production. And to the greatest extent, if you can produce the power you need right where you need it, great. To the point you need to go a little further out to get additional power, great. So just as you've described the buildings, in a community like this, I think we're going to see that happening all across the world.
And the great thing for what we do is all of those systems are going to have idle electrons
Yeah.
that don't have something to do at a particular time,
Yeah.
at a particular moment.
Yeah.
And in our industry, we've historically been so focused on 24/7 production, 24/7 uptime, because we've been grid attached. And we're chasing this need to be so efficient and get a payback as quickly as we can on the infrastructure and CapEx. Now we're vertically integrating all the way down to the power plant. We now own a wind farm in Texas. We're now owning on-site power generation in oil fields, because that gets us energy that's much less expensive because it's effectively stranded. And now we can put our data centers there, but they only operate when the energy is available. And so we're able to take older equipment, which extends the life of our assets effectively, which makes us much more capital efficient over time. So it's this very interesting change in our industry, going from 24/7 uptime like AI data centers to going to essentially dispatchable uptime and only focusing on the time when it makes sense to operate. And when you add that to the AI industry, which has this variable load that goes up and down all the time, depending on queries, and you marry our dispatchable load to it, you get this very interesting thing, which is the utility all of a sudden, instead of seeing a demand curve that varies, they'll just see a flat line.
And they don't need to know how that power is being used. But you hold it within your hands to make some really interesting trade-offs. And this is something I've really enjoyed learning as I've joined the Mara board. seeing the team recognize the ability to do arbitrage amongst the cost of power, the demand of the data centers, the Bitcoin performance, et cetera. So you're able to make those kinds of decisions that even say, yes, what's the best use of the electrons, but what's the best use of our investment?
Exactly. And one thing we're super excited about is marrying now Bitcoin mining and AI and looking at data centers and really looking at managing load, which is beneficial to both the data center operator, it's beneficial to the utility, and building the technologies. We talk about AI and we talk about AI's, the importance of AI in managing the digital fabric of the grid. Those technologies that balance load inside the data center, but also outside the data center, I think are going to be critical. And that's a key part of our vision.
I think so too. I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you're thinking of other uses of the blockchain. So at Siemens, we're intensely focused on this. We're working with people in infrastructure, we're working with people in industry, we're working with people in transportation who have the need to be able to build secure records of transactions, whether it's assuring an end user of the sourcing of their product, whether it's protecting the IP of a creator as they put things out into a design system. I'm thinking that, yeah, where we are today with Bitcoin is just the start of what is going to be a transformation in computing that uses the blockchain and actually monetizes the blockchain in a very different way. We all know the vision: generate coins now, generate transaction fees later. I'm curious where you think Mara can influence and drive the development of that market.
Well, you and I are both familiar with the development of the IoT industry, and it takes decades for this technology to permeate itself. But today, almost every factory, every system is connected somehow, and we're getting telemetry and insights. Blockchain technology is not just going to be a system of record, a ledger in the traditional sense. It will be the oracle that provides the key data points that other systems will be able to rely on as the true record. Imagine a traffic system knowing the real state of traffic flow, the timing of lights, and knowing that that data can't be infiltrated, it can't be obfuscated, it can't be hallucinated because it's sitting on a blockchain. And you can't change that data. It can't be ransomware. I mean, look at healthcare.
Yeah.
If you put blockchain into the healthcare, these hospitals that have suffered ransomware attacks, you wouldn't have an issue with that if data was on the blockchain, because nobody could take it and they couldn't essentially encrypt it so you didn't have it. So blockchain is going to play this revolutionary role over many decades as we continue to build systems. And we believe that the Bitcoin blockchain is the preeminent blockchain because of its security. And the layer 2 blockchains that are built, the side chains, using technologies like our Endura platform and others, will enable people to build these systems, which are then anchored in the security of the Bitcoin blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain, even as you look at a national security perspective, it plays a very special role because it's a source of freedom capital. It provides people the ability to move assets outside of the control of governments that necessarily aren't democratic. It allows people to have the freedom to move freely around the world with what they need. Yes, have there been bad actors that use it? Yes, but the US dollar and cash, the $100 bill, I think is the biggest tool used by criminals in the world most probably. But as we look at Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain is going to become an issue of national security. The US needs to ensure that enough mining is done in the US such that US companies, US citizens, people investing in Bitcoin and Bitcoin denominated assets are going to be able to transact. Because just like the US dollar in some people's eyes is viewed as having been weaponized, what we don't want are the BRIC nations, for example, to ally against the US and weaponize the Bitcoin blockchain against the US by building all this capacity. Today, China is growing its energy generation capacity. They prohibited Bitcoin 3 years ago, Bitcoin mining in the country, which is why the US became the preeminent nation in Bitcoin mining in the world. And today we're sitting at somewhere between 35 and 40% of the world capacity. That's changing. China has turned on the spigot again. They have huge amounts of energy that they have built out that they have no consumption for. So now they're putting Bitcoin mining back to work in their countries. Russia has opened up their markets to doing Bitcoin mining. Nation states all over the world have seen this. As countries adopt Bitcoin as a sovereign asset, as a store of value for their assets, they are going to want to have Bitcoin mining, not to discover new Bitcoin, because there are only 1 million Bitcoin left to be emitted, but it becomes a question of national security now regarding being able to get your transactions processed. If you are locked out of the market, it's just like being locked out of the banking system. And this is why it's critical that the US continues to grow the amount of Bitcoin that's mined in the country. And I think Bitcoin mining is really such a bad term. It's transaction processing,
Yeah.
right? Think of Bitcoin mining as doing the clearing process that Visa, MasterCard, or banks do. Somebody goes and I give you a Bitcoin, that's a transaction on the ledger. That ledger goes into what's called the mempool. The mempool is then accessed by miners who take that transaction, process it into a block, put it on the blockchain, and then we get paid by Bitcoin subsidies, which is how new Bitcoin come into the market, and transaction fees. And as you said earlier, there'll be this crossover point where transaction fees will exceed the subsidies. And you'll have what's called the security budget of Bitcoin covered through that. As Bitcoin mining continues to process transactions, Bitcoin really will be ingrained in the fabric, not just of the energy grid, but also the monetary grid. And we have started thinking about energy in a very different way today. So within Mara, we operate an energy transformation business. We go all the way from generating the electrons all the way to turning those electrons into Bitcoin. We're also very focused on the whole technology stack, all the way from the ASICs that operate Bitcoin miners that we helped co-found a company called Auradine around, all the way up to the orchestration layer. Energy management and the marriage of these two, we believe, is going to be absolutely critical. We've coined this term digital energy. Digital energy for us is really the confluence of compute and energy in how you create value by converting energy into a monetary instrument in the sense of Bitcoin today. But energy is this very unique thing. There's all sorts of different values to energy. Right? Energy can be a high value thing if it's available 24/7, 365, 5 nines availability, or a low value thing when it's stranded in a battery somewhere and can't be used. And so our mission is really to convert and optimize the value of all those electrons and turning them into digital value. So as we look at AI, we see this need to put compute at the edge. We see this need, this huge amount of energy that these AI data centers need. They're now going into the energy business. In your mind, do you think that data center operators, the hyperscalers, are going to become hyper utilities?
The hyperscalers have a group of sustainability officers, interestingly, who have made it their mission to assure that they have adequate power. And they've actually pulled their demand to work on PPAs with large providers of renewable energy. That's been a focus of theirs. It'd be fascinating to have this discussion with them and really probe what it would mean for the data center itself to play a more pivotal role in the evolution of the grid.
And as the grid continues to evolve, you know how you now have hyperscalers becoming IPPs,
Yeah.
kind of. And a certain amount of their excess energy may be sold back into the grid.
Yeah.
What does that do to the way the grid operates from a regulatory perspective and an organizational perspective?
Yeah, Fred, I think this is something that's happening all around the world, is this question of how do we regulate this rapidly changing landscape? In the United States, 3,000 utilities across the United States, who are the voices who can actually drive change? Regulation allows independent utilities to be very, very powerful, making their own decisions. And so I think educating the public is going to be a key part of what needs to happen here. And I know you and I have both been doing our part to make sure that we educate policymakers, lawmakers on the potential for making changes here. But you can just look at the last few years and begin to understand the importance of this question. Think about what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine. And then Germany suddenly had a question of what do we do about the power we need inside our country? Germany is the industrial heartbeat of Europe. What was abundantly clear was that they didn't have the grid connections between North and South in order to provide power. They were counting on that fossil fuel production from Russia in order to fuel their economy. And so what you can see immediately is the impact of these questions on the ability of an economy to thrive in times of disruption.
And the US is in a very unique position. Energy rich. We have more energy than we know what to do. We pump more oil than Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
We have natural gas coming out of
A net exporter to the rest of the
the
world.
world. This energy abundance, if we make it available in the country, that's an amazing thing for the ability for the US to grow and get productivity, because energy as a factor of labor production, if we think about in the old days, what made China so prosperous? It was all about cheap labor.
Yeah.
Right? And the labor component of any product was fairly high. And then automation starts eating into that number, and prosperity in China starts raising the average cost of a unit of labor. Now, as essentially production becomes digital,
Yeah.
it's all about energy is driving your input. And so this question of energy abundance and this question of energy as a matter of national security, if you are going to be the leading country in the world, if you're going to defend your borders, you need to have energy abundance. What you said about Germany, they really put themselves in a position that was very difficult. They shut down nuclear, they shut down coal, and then they're in a position all of a sudden where they're dependent on others. I know, for example, that there are few countries in Europe where there are bilateral agreements for energy, which means if you have energy abundance in one country of the EU, they can't necessarily sell energy to another. I'm Swedish by heritage and was educated in Sweden. Sweden is an energy abundant nation. In the north, they have all this hydroelectric energy, more than they know what to do with. And most of the population lives in the south. But they have agreements where they're exporting this cheap energy to Germany, and then they're having to buy energy at a higher price to supply the south of Sweden. And so it's really interesting, the conundrum the Europeans have, where the US and China and Russia don't have this problem. And so what does that bode for Europe? What are your thoughts on Europe and where it's going from an energy perspective?
Well, I think the answer to that question is tied up in the answer to the question of how are they going to handle AI? We're in a moment where these questions are intertwined. And we heard JD Vance at the AI summit in Paris say that really we have to innovate and then regulate. Europe is going to have to figure that out. They have to begin with the end in mind. What are we trying to achieve? And then figure out how to build the regulatory framework to accomplish objectives. Frankly, we need to do the same thing here. Yes, we have energy abundance. And I love the way you just described the sort of history of the globalization that's happened. It's true. Manufacturing in the US was completely gutted as manufacturers everywhere sought low-cost labor. Just get that next penny, that next nickel out of every transaction and go to where it's cheapest. Well, this is why Siemens is so focused on the technology that enables industry. Because frankly, this AI that's coming to be now expands what's humanly possible. We can make every person in an industrial setting more productive. We can absolutely neutralize the labor component, get out of labor arbitrage, and now get into this energy question. Where is it going to be cheapest to make? And frankly, we're working on technologies today that it would allow a manufacturer to have, call it micro sites all across the United States, all around the world, with the ability to transmit not only bills of materials, but bills of process execution. Now the ability to sort of say, hey, I've got the magic formula. I can transmit those. And by the way, I build a digital certificate on the blockchain so that someone knows that this is my protected IP built to my standards. Now they get a genuine digital part, and they're good to go manufacture locally. So we're just on the front end of all this, but what I hope people are beginning to see is how these systems now are intertwined. The evolution of AI, the evolution of our energy systems go hand in hand. And Mara is sitting smack dab in the middle.
We're super excited about it. You marry energy with AI, with essentially digitally enabled manufacturing, 3D printing, essentially marrying energy information results in manifestation.
Yes.
And it's, we think about those of us who are old enough to remember Star Trek, and they had this machine where they would say, I want to eat something, and the microwave would open and there would be this food materialized out of nowhere. Manufacturing is moving that way, and Siemens as a company, as a conglomerate, has been very involved in industrial automation, process control, healthcare, energy, these areas of megatrends, as you talked about. And it's very interesting to see now how this is all really coming together, and the foresight that the team at Siemens had to be able to pull these pieces together.
So what began when I joined Siemens as, hey, Barb, can you come in and help Siemens address the needs of the world's largest customer, the US federal government, developed into, because I had been exposed to all parts of the Siemens Corporation, developed into an invitation to take on the role of Siemens US CEO. The US is Siemens' largest market globally. We've got something like 25% of the global business happening in the US. And I've been in this role now for 8 years. When I joined, man, there were other parts of the world that were rocking and rolling, growing fast. Can I tell you, right now, the US is where most of the action is. I recently joined the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, and an economist was giving us a picture of the post-COVID economy development around the world. And what was clear is in the US, we put money into the hands of individuals. What those people did is they quit their company jobs and started their own businesses. And what you see is this tremendous uptick in productivity. Other parts of the world gave money to companies to keep people employed. And what you see is a kind of lukewarm reaction afterwards. This economic engine that we have in the US, where individuals take that control, build their businesses, this is a powerful time for the US, and such a privilege to be CEO of Siemens USA.
When you think about individuals taking capital, turning that capital into businesses, you can marry individuals' capital and now add AI. And you have an engine for prosperity that is very, very special.
We are on the very front end of this, and nobody knows how the movie ends. There's one more powerful thing about the blockchain, which is we know technology continues to evolve, and there's a real concern about the post-quantum effects of, will our systems be secure? I have the privilege today of serving on the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee. And this is, in essence, the internet in a room, helping to advise the White House on what are the things we have to do for security. And we've just produced a paper on post-quantum computing. What I'm so excited about is the promise of blockchain for the security of future transactions.
If you think about quantum is very good at asymmetric decryption, if you would. And the vast majority of all of the passwords on bank accounts, government systems, et cetera, are all based on RSA, which is an asymmetric code. The Bitcoin blockchain, the ledger itself, is not based on that technology. It's based on a technology that's very difficult for quantum to decrypt. And so the base ledger, the layer one, if you would, is fairly quantum resistant. And to be fair, the only thing one needs to do to make it even more quantum resistant is just essentially go from SHA-256 to 512, and you've just created a whole other hurdle that quantum would have to have. What is not quantum resistant in the world of Bitcoin are wallets, because those are based on public-private keys, which are RSA-based. As you look at the telecommunications network, you look at infrastructure, you look at manufacturing data, government data, it has to be made quantum resistant, because the problem today is not one of people will crack into systems in the future. It's all the data that's being collected today that is secure. In the future, somebody will be able to go back and decrypt that data. And imagine the amount of information that nation states, criminals, et cetera, could have access to if they had 20 years of your emails that they could look at, 20 years of your logins to your accounts. The financial system is only now starting to look at quantum resistance. In a prior role, I was chairman of a German company, Utimaco, which was one of the leading cryptography technology companies in Europe. And we built hardware security modules, which are meant to secure the data keys of NATO and a lot of governments. And we were involved in working with NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technologies, to identify a series of quantum-proof technologies or quantum-resistant technologies. And today there are three basically that came out of the recommendations of that process, and you'll see them implemented over time. But if you read the newspapers today, you see new quantum processors. Microsoft just yesterday announced one. IBM had one not long ago. Google had one a few weeks prior to that. So you're seeing this arms race essentially accelerating. People are getting scared about quantum. I think we're still a good distance away from it being a problem. And what I call the canary in the coal mine is when you see Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta change the security certificates on their websites to quantum resistant algorithms, you'll know they're worried about it. Because it's a 5-year process for banks and companies to change out their whole password infrastructure. It's so ingrained. But the real fear people have about quantum, as I said, it's decrypting old data. But if somebody, a nation state, for example, has access to quantum, and I'll use an example that somebody mentioned to me the other day. If you go back to World War II, when the British essentially were able to hack the Enigma machines that the Germans used for decoding, knowing you can break into a system, knowing you can read somebody else's communication, you don't want to let them know you can do that. And actually, Winston Churchill had this conundrum at one point where he knew that, I think it was Belfast or another city, was about to be firebombed. And yet he couldn't warn the people because that would essentially alert the Germans to the fact that their communication systems had been hacked. It is totally likely that some nation state will eventually have a quantum computer and that they will have the ability to inflict damage if they want to. And that's why it's so important for us to deploy these quantum resistant technologies today. From the world of automation, you're maybe familiar with the Stuxnet virus and what the Israelis, with potentially some help from the US, did to essentially infect PLCs, program logic controllers. The PLCs that controlled the centrifuges that made the nuclear material for the Iranians give a signal that everything is normal, but in reality, these machines were spinning out of control and damaging themselves. And so as we look at the risk for quantum, it's all about how it could potentially be used as a weapon to harm our infrastructure. So I fully agree with you. We have to go to blockchain. We have to build in tools that are quantum resistant. And we need to do that very quickly. And I think the government's aware of it. They're driving it. But it takes industry to comply with it. I mean, we have equipment in our infrastructure and our electrical grids today that was put in place in the 50s and 60s and 70s that
You're telling me.
and it needs to be upgraded. And that's a cost. It doesn't drive advancement. It just keeps us in the same place.
Yep. And what you'll discover is that Internet of Things, many of those platforms have very limited compute capacity. So we've got a conundrum on our hands to figure out how we're going to tackle that problem.
Absolutely. And I think we're very excited about the role we can play in not just the blockchain technologies, but also how we can leverage our technology to really make the grid more secure and more balanced. So Barbara, you and I both testified on Capitol Hill recently. In our case, it was about debanking. I know in your case, it has more to do with manufacturing, automation, AI. Please, what was the topic? What did you say? What were your recommendations?
Yeah, it was really a great experience. I was invited by the House Energy and Commerce Committee. There's a subcommittee dealing with AI and manufacturing. And so what the members are interested in is learning from industry, learning from academia, and actually learning from industry coalitions about our view on what needs to happen on the legislative agenda. And what a privilege that is. And that whole experience, we've all seen it on television, the people sitting at their tables and speaking into their microphones and really trying to address maybe even the question can't be articulated well, because can we expect our lawmakers to understand every technology they could possibly be faced with? Absolutely not. So the opportunity to help shape their thinking is a true privilege. In the case of us with AI and manufacturing, what I want everybody to know is that Siemens is leading the way in a new tech sector. Industrial AI is what we're focused on. Think about the tech that's been developed over the last 20 years. It's all about the Internet of People. And what we're working on now is that Internet of Things. And it's an order of magnitude bigger than the opportunity that we've just addressed over the last couple of decades. So huge opportunity, tied to everything we've been talking about. The energy needed to enable the technology like AI that is going to make us able to manufacture in the US on a level playing field with the rest of the world. The number one point I wanted to make sure that lawmakers understood is the difference between industrial AI and what we call consumer AI. I know there's a lot of concern in the public's eye of, where's the data coming from? Does it have bias? Is my personal data being used, et cetera? In industrial AI, what we're doing, in main AI, you often talk about data lakes and, in our case, we talk about data puddles. The controlled environment of a manufacturing site or of a piece of infrastructure, sensors, et cetera, feeding into systems that can then apply machine learning, deep neural networks that can help make sense of data that no human could possibly manage to do, so that we get to kinds of impacts like the ability to prevent flaws, the ability to do preventive maintenance well before a piece of machinery finally breaks down. These machines tend to show their age as they go, and well before maintenance is needed, we can take preventive action. Boy, and keeping systems up means more productivity. Same thing applies to how people will be engaged with work. Everybody, of course, in Congress is worried about what about jobs? Is automation going to replace people? And no, nothing could be further from the truth. So the chance to talk to lawmakers about how today Siemens has opened up a new manufacturing facility in Fort Worth. We used AI to help design the product, to design the production line. We hired former high school teachers to build a program so that we could bring people with no manufacturing experience, bring them into our workplace, show them how to use the technology that we've introduced there. And now we've got in Fort Worth going on 700 new employees.
Wow.
Who came off of the sidelines to be part of manufacturing in America. This is the promise. And I had so much fun sharing that perspective. I'm curious, though. It's a friendly topic, and I had a very friendly audience. I know that there are many more public perception issues when it comes to the role of blockchain and Bitcoin in our financial systems. I gotta know, how did your conversation go?
I think in our case, the prior administration had a position around Bitcoin where they wanted to ring fence companies in the crypto industry away from the banking system. Certain members of Congress, post the FTX debacle, felt that it was too much of a risk. And so how do you keep companies from operating in the financial system? You just make it hard for them to have on and off ramps. And there was an operation that has been named by the press and people, Operation Choke Point 2.0. Operation Choke Point 1.0 was something the Obama administration did regarding the gun industry, porn, and gambling, online gambling, gaming industries. Operation Choke Point 2.0 added the crypto industry to it and essentially instructed banks, not via regulation, but via inspection and harassment, essentially, that if you take on crypto customers, we are going to make your life difficult. And banks already have a difficult enough life, and so they chose not to. I went to go testify to Congress, to the House Finance Subcommittee on banking, to really explain our experience as a company. We had bank accounts shut down by banks, and we were told basically go find somebody else to bank with. If a company can't pay payroll, if a company can't pay its taxes, if a company can't pay its operating expenses, it goes out of business. And this was, an operation orchestrated by members of the former administration. The Republican side of the committee was trying to get access to data and our experiences, and I think we were able to share really, what happened to us and what we thought they should do about it. So we talked a little bit about digital energy, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this concept of computation and AI now giving a purpose to energy, so that energy really has a purpose. What are your thoughts on this?
We have resources all around us. How do we use them? How we use them determines our future. And Mara is sitting at the perfect nexus where you have the ability to give agency to those electrons so they get used for a higher purpose than they would otherwise be. I mean, I'm telling you, Mara is so exciting. Not only do you have the core mission today of you're verticalizing the production of Bitcoin and therefore monetizing those electrons, but you're also spinning out technologies every day. You have such a creative team. When you put a challenge in front of them, they get the vision and they put their creativity to work. And you never know what new opportunities are going to show up as they invent the next chip, the next cooling process, the next edge device. The sky's the limit with the Mara team.
Barbara, thank you for saying that, because we are so proud about our team. The Mara team is really focused on a mission, and we are really focused on impacting the world positively with everything we do, leveraging what we can do for all our stakeholders. It's not just our shareholders, but our employees, the communities where we operate, the fact that we're able to bring economic prosperity to communities by not just bringing jobs and investing in the communities, but we pay property taxes that in some of these rural cities essentially pay for the fire department, they pay for the police department, they provide public services. And so we're so proud of what we're able to do and the impact we're able to have, not just at the local level, but at the national level and also at the global level.
It's one reason I'm thrilled that you've asked me to lead the committee of the board that will focus on that impact on societies. This goes way beyond what we can do as a corporation.
Absolutely.
Fred, sometimes just being able to explain what's going on to others is the greatest gift we can give. And it's one reason why my team asked me to start a podcast at Siemens. It's called The Optimistic Outlook. I've got a premise that it's times of disruption that give us the best opportunity to shape the future. It's in those moments when everybody is asking, my heavens, what do we do now? Where people who have vision can say, let me share something with you. This is the art of the possible. And that gives teams something to rally around. It gives people that sense of purpose. And when you can leave worries behind and devote your energy to what needs to be done, something that's in your control, it changes everything. So that's the small part I'm trying to play is to introduce voices through the Optimistic Outlook podcast.
That sounds like a great initiative. And it's exciting because you have the opportunity to answer questions people are asking every day. When people are worried, when people are concerned, they're looking for understanding. They're looking for data. Somebody once said that fear is really just a lack of knowledge. If you knew what was going to happen, you wouldn't be afraid because you could prepare for it. The unknown is scary for people. The unknown about the future, the unknown about what's going on in the world, and your ability to tell great stories and educate people and share your knowledge to give people comfort, I think is so important. Barbara, thank you so much for spending time with us here today in this fireside chat. I so appreciate collaborating with you. I'm so happy to have you on the board, and I just love the insights that you're providing and how you're really taking all those years of experience in not just dealing with government, but in these technologies you've been a part of over the years, from your time at IBM all the way to your time now at Siemens, and really how that's helping us form a perspective on what we can do better to change the world and make it a better place. Thank you.
What a privilege. Thank you, Fred.